More pizzas in the oven, so don't be shy.
Okay.
It's quite a salad.
Get on Twitter and see what it's doing on Twitter.
What do you mean? Oh, you got it live on Twitter for
Supposedly.
under your name?
No, CSU Crops.
Okay.
How are you? Good. Good to meet you. Yeah, you're. Right, that's what I thought. Yep. I was like. Yeah. I was thinking on there. Oh, is it CSU Crops? Idiot.
You're gonna make it so
Fancy CCS.
Okay. Can you hear anything?
Where's the mic? Oh. I can hear them. Are we not? Yeah, how much of it? Oh, we got 4 on there.
I'm gonna show you what this is gonna look like. So. Well, you can't really see your notes there, but this is what the live stream people are seeing, and if they comment on YouTube or Twitter, it's going to show up right there. So you can see comments live.
Oh.
So, look at my slide.
You can see what you finally like I need.
So I tried it yesterday, it was like a 30-second flag.
Oh, there it went. Not bad. So, oh, that was your first one.
And then I go with the new one. And I go this fast, and I go, 100 people in the fire. Yeah. I heard you. I heard you've been there.
Should I put, say, about a 30-second delay on the? You want me to occasionally get on there? If anybody has comments or questions, put it on Twitter.
Well, they can do it from YouTube.
I ended up with this one.
But you're right.
You did.
This one was nice. Good. You get it. I probably.
Well, I understand my talk.
I didn't know what I was saying.
You guys got some items.
And talking and walked away with half of them.
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Well,
Really used to.
Yeah, we did more in the past.
you know, I did a lot of.
Yeah, we went, yeah.
I've got
Probably
200 level classes. I did one.
Yeah.
You know, 100, 200.
Well, you're kind of the area guy.
Associates. And then.
Yeah.
It's really been down there.
Like crash here. No, I'll give you a card.
In the mid-80s.
Yeah, we.
And. You know that role.
Yeah, that was one of the things.
That was one of your ones.
Yeah, I'll lose.
Where's the injury? You really get it.
I can't, well, I got it, I had it.
Everybody's good at pizza now.
There we go.
He's got to start the line. So I did.
So it's gonna ride on the.
Oh, yeah. See if she.
Yeah. We got our place.
Oh, okay.
Better, you know. Yep.
Well, they have solar facilities.
Not anymore, but.
No, you're right. I'm not a cook. And.
No. Is that kind of like
Yeah, personalized. The guy there.
Called.
Yeah, I would have been.
Only that man, this thing for 10 years, and it would have been in the semi then.
Yeah.
Scanner.
So.
Anyway, yeah, that's one way to come.
Sounds good. How's things going?
Oh, slow. Well,
Yeah.
You know where my love is?
So I know.
How's it going?
Larry,
Good.
My love is right on the street line.
Say goodbye.
Oh, they were all there.
Okay. Start picking up and it was a long way.
I could see one. Whoa.
Oh, that's true. Years ago.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. He probably only had one job, but yeah.
Will? Yes.
No, I know. That's when Jim said he was going to get.
Yeah.
Made a quick trip to Chris.
No, that's pretty good.
Yeah, I'm gonna go in.
But it's also.
So you can insurance and then?
A lot of salaries or. Which I see.
Some more of these on that stand back.
Okay, well, we came over, I lived an hour and a half. Over there. Yeah. I live literally 40 miles. Almost straight. Well.
Are you?
Yeah, how are you doing?
Good. Time for more?
Oh, wow.
Yeah, don't be shy.
Don't be shy, yeah. Captain Moore.
When they.
Well, they are smoking.
Where do you stay? Got the new one.
So it was real.
When we were there.
Cobblestone?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The one that-
You didn't do anything.
Yes.
Wasn't that great to wear?
I haven't been in New York yet. Saw it.
It was new, so.
Yeah, well, this year, I guess.
I hadn't bought it, so.
I didn't think I'd know anybody. Yeah. Oh, we got a few people here.
Have you ever done?
Oh, there's
a good acre.
Hey, y'all have been going off.
How about we go find
And then we'll just put these in.
That second year, I was glad I only had that 10 acres. It did all right, but it didn't get it dried down, starting to fall over.
There you go. Tetris.
Just the exact same year.
That's great.
I can't remember.
Yeah.
Too long.
Better grab yourself a plate.
Probably.
We just kind of made it last minute. People that show up, get spoiled.
There's plenty of pizzas, so don't be shy.
Sure.
We don't have time.
Yeah.
I couldn't remember.
I don't mean till they get.
Well, no.
I'm not just gonna put a whole.
All the hours you've been looking for.
I'm the only damn one that's first.
Yeah. I'll just get small, I don't farm that much, I'm sure it's not gonna handle a lot.
Everybody, thanks for coming. I'm Jim Diamond. I'm on the Colorado Sorghum Board, and we're hosting this meeting. This is Brent Bean. He's the sorghum checkoff agronomist, and he's going to do a presentation on the various herbicide technology traits that are being released and other agronomy type information. And Sally is going to go over her results and study she's been doing with sorghum and with the crops testing program. And help yourself to as much pizza and salad, and we have cookies on the end here. And oh, don't forget to sign in. There's handouts at the back. We'll hand the clipboard around because we're going to be doing a giveaway. And that's pretty much it. We're going to start with Brent, I believe.
Oh, I gotta go
Or,
sign
are we
in.
going to start with Sarah? No, never mind. We're going to start with Sarah.
All right, you're dang good. Okay.
Oh, you are? Okay.
All right, and just so everybody knows, this is being live streamed on the internet, on Twitter and YouTube, and it's being recorded on YouTube. We can delete the recording later, but it is being recorded right now, so behave yourselves.
And your cell phones, please try and put them on silent or vibrate or something.
And there's a little camera, you guys are gonna be front and center on the camera too.
I didn't know we were gonna be videoed to go, Andy. I know it.
All right, so I'm Sally Jones Diamond. I run the crops testing program at Carter State University. We're based out of here in Akron. Myself and Candace Talbert are here in this extension office, and then our field guy is out at the USDA station here just east of town, 4 miles, where we have all of our equipment and quite a few trials out there. So I'm going to talk about some of the research we've done in the last couple of years. The first one I want to talk about is the seeding rate by planting date by hybrid study that we did in 2021 and 2022. We have 4 site years of data. You can see the 3 seeding rates. We had 20, 40, and 60,000 seeds per acre with a DeKalb early maturity hybrid and a Dynagrow early maturity hybrid as well. And then we did a normal and late plant date. We didn't stick to a calendar date because we figured most farmers don't stick to a calendar date. It's just when you can get in. So we did when we could get in and then a week or 2 after we could get in. And those were our plant dates. So our results from those 2 years, you can see we've got Otis from year 1, Sheridan Lake from year 1, Akron from year 2, and then Sheridan Lake again in year 2. Our grain yield was anywhere from under 10 to almost 70 bushels an acre. You can see that in 2021, there wasn't much of a difference between the late and normal on the yield at Otis. There was at Sheridan Lake. Late planting really knocked our yield back about 20 bushels. And then at Akron last year, we couldn't get in the field the first time until June 10th because there was no moisture. So we thought, why plant if it's not going to come up? So the first normal plant date was June 10th, which is already late. And then the late one was a week to 10 days after that. And we didn't make it to maturity on that late planting date. So that's why the yields are low and the test weights were low as well. And then Sheridan Lake last year, you can see again that your earlier normal planting date is better than your late. So the takeaway from this is plant as early as you can. So then we looked at the seeding rates. Again, we have the 4 different site years across the bottom and then the 3 seeding rates within each site year. Otis year 1, no real difference. Sheridan Lake, where we had higher yield and higher yield potential, we saw some significant differences, especially when you went from 20 to 60,000 seeds per acre. And then last year, we didn't see any difference among the 3 seeding rates.
Sally, you not see much tillering at that location, or?
It depends when we plant. So the late planted stuff had like no tillering. The earlier stuff maybe had 1 tiller, but it varies a lot by the year, I've noticed. So now I'm going to talk about some of the yield trial results from last year. I'm going to go over Akron and Brush. You guys probably don't need a reminder of what last year looked like. That was our planting date in June. And then by the end of the year in December, we had just over 12 inches of rainfall for the total year, 6 inches in season. So way below normal. We were still able to get usable data though. The average yield was 27 bushels per acre. We had quite a few hybrids in the top yield group there from a couple different seed companies. Since Brent is going to be talking about the herbicide tolerant sorghum, I highlighted one from Sorghum Partners, the 3830. It's an earlier one, and then we had 45A45 double team, and then we had an Alta Seed one, which was the 1120 IG. That one, when we have pre-flowering drought stress, it doesn't flower. Because we've seen this I've seen this a couple years now in our trials where at Akron and sometimes at Siebert and Sheridan Lake, it just will not, it doesn't have enough gas and it will not flower. And so it won't yield, and that's why the yield is 33% of average. So I also want to point out, we put in 2-year average yield for hybrids that have been in multiple years at the same site. We take stand counts on everything. We take 50% bloom date, or days to 50% bloom, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then we also provide the maturity group in the green color. So now if we look at brush, you'll see this 1120 IG. This is irrigated, by the way. This is the first year we've had this trial at this site. That 1120 IG made it, and it was perfectly happy, and it did really well at the trial there. The average yield for the irrigated trial was 112 bushels per acre. You can see the 2 double team hybrids from Sorghum Partners did well. You can see the other data there. So in line with that, I'm going to talk about maturity considerations since we are at a high elevation, most of us in high latitude. Days to mid-bloom provided by almost every seed company are not real applicable to us up here because our elevation is so high. So I usually add at least 10 days to the bloom dates provided by the companies to get closer to actual for what it would be for us north of I-70. And then you have to keep in mind too, from the date of your bloom date, which is hopefully in early August or late July, you need another 30 to 45 days to get to black layer and maturity and dry down and all that good stuff. So plant an early to medium early hybrid up here. I don't think we've ever had a medium maturity hybrid up here that has made it consistently. We have a lot in our trials. Look at your average frost date for your location. Decide if test weight's important to you. And just keep in mind too that the seed heads turning color does not mean that the grain is mature. You need to actually pick a seed off like the middle of the head there and look for that black layer, kind of like you would in corn. Same concept. So when it hits black layer, then you're mature. So I updated this table today and put in our 2021 and 2022 data. So I have some commonly grown hybrids for up here. So we've got DeKalb 2805, Mycogen. The M59GB 57 is the old, the Dynagro is the old Mycogen 1G557. I've almost forgotten the number now. There's the old Mycogen number that was really popular. And then we've got some other ones. So you can see the days to mid-bloom really varies from year to year. 2018 and 19, it took a long time. Last year was about the earliest we've had. And then this green column there is the company estimated days to bloom. And then on the right side is the difference in days, from shortest difference to the longest difference. So it can vary a lot just among years and among locations. So just keep that in mind. So my last thoughts on maturity, if you want plants to mature more quickly, you can plant a higher population to discourage tillers, which isn't going to be a huge deal up here anyways. You can use a wider row spacing, then your within row plant spacing will be closer together. We actually did a row spacing, I'm not going to present the results, but we did a row spacing trial comparing 30 and 60 inch or skip row last year at Akron for sorghum checkoff. We didn't see a difference in yield or test weight or anything. Plant reasonably early in the season to accumulate your heat units. Use early maturity hybrids or medium early and make sure you have sufficient nitrogen in your soil. Okay, so this is a fun one. So microbiological product trials. We've been testing these for a couple years now as well in sorghum and in winter wheat and corn for probably 6 or 7 years on and off. So the Colorado sorghum producers funded this trial the last couple of years. Microbiologicals, just to give you a quick overview if you're not too familiar with them, they're products that contain naturally occurring microbes. That could be bacteria, it could be fungi. It's a growing part of the ag market. There's a lot of companies that sell it. It can be liquid, it can be dry, wettable powder. You can apply it in the furrow at planting. It can be seed applied. There's a million different ways that you can get it in the ground with the seed. It's reported to help increase root growth, root and plant structures, and yield and nutrient uptake. And so some of the claims are that you can reduce your nitrogen by X number of pounds and replace it with a product, or maybe the same for phosphorus. Some products are also combined with humic acid or fertilizers as well. So microbiologicals are endophytes. So here you've got a little diagram of your plant and your root right there. And then if this is a soil, you've got fungi and bacteria that will go into the root between those root plant cells. And it's mutually beneficial for both the plant and the fungi or the bacteria, right? They're sharing things. The plant wants things that the fungi is giving them, and vice versa. And so it's a good relationship to have. So we did this for 2 years. We have 7 site years of data. We started with 3 products the first year, and then last year we had 5 products plus an untreated control. So we just wanted to know if you guys as farmers, or if you're advising farmers, are they going to have a yield gain? Is it going to be worth the cost of the product? So we tested Valent, Myco-Apply, Endoprime SC. You can see the rate there, 2 ounces an acre. That is a fungal product. Pivot Bio Return, which is a bacterial product, at 12.8 ounces an acre. Royal Grow Enzyme Max and Ultra Sweet. So those were 2 products combined. And then the following year, we repeated the first 2, and then we dropped the Royal Grow because I didn't get the product in time. And we added 3 of the Indigo Ag Biotrinsic products. Those were applied to the seed before planting. And the use rate on those were pretty low. So this is the results from 2021. This is averaged across Siebert, Sheridan Lake, Walsh, and Akron. So it's averaged across the 4 sites because there wasn't a difference in the results across sites. So we can just combine them all together. You can see here the yield on the left. We were around 60 to 65 bushels an acre. And so each product is a colored bar, and then compared to the untreated control in gray. So the error bars just show you that we didn't see a statistically significant difference among any of these products versus the untreated control for that year. So then last year we did it again. Again, this is combined across, last year was 3 sites. So we've got the Valent Endoprime again, Pivot Bio Return, and then the 3 Indigo Ag products. And you can see again that we didn't see a significant difference among the products compared to the untreated control. So my initial thoughts on microbiologicals is we've tested these under multiple field conditions with a wide range of fertility. We had field sites that had 30 pounds of nitrogen available per acre in the top 2 feet, and sites that had over 100 pounds of nitrogen, and no matter where we were, we couldn't see a response to the product. So I thought, okay, is it us? Are we doing something wrong? So I looked in the literature, tried to find some studies. There's not very many studies on this right now, as of yet. Studies that I did see show varied plant responses, both in the lab or greenhouse and in the field. Oklahoma State University actually did a very similar trial through the Sorghum Checkoff the last couple of years, Dr. Brian Arnall. So I contacted him to see what his findings were. You can see he got pretty fancy with his. He had the 4 different nitrogen rates, and then all of these products were applied at the 60-pound or reduced nitrogen rate. So the overlaps were the Indigo Biotrinsic, the Pivot Bio Proven In, and the Valent Endoprime SC. He had 3 sites in 2022. And these are the results from the Lake Carl Blackwell Research Farm last year. And these don't have error bars, but there was not a statistical difference among the treatments. You have the nitrogen rates there. They didn't even get a nitrogen response. And then all the products, there wasn't a difference. He was disappointed with their yields because they usually get better yields than that. And then again, this is from last year at their Perkins research station. And again, there wasn't any significant difference among all those treatments. So, my final thoughts on it for right now is so far we haven't seen a measurable difference in terms of yield in Colorado or Oklahoma. We've tested in other crops and had similar results in wheat and corn. This year I'm thinking I'd like to try it under irrigated conditions and see if additional water will help those populations maybe flourish a little bit more. Limited water seems to slow the colonization of microbes. That's just a guess that I have. That's not scientifically factual. So we'll keep trying, and I hope something sticks. Want to point out our website, it's just csukrops.com. Try to make it easy to get to. On that website, we've got the different crops that we've done trials on the last 10 or 15 or 20 years. We update it at least once a week. And on the sorghum page, we have all those different sites from last year that we have trials for, in addition to forage sorghum, if you have any interest in that. And then the Akron row spacing and the microbiological study that I just showed you, those are also posted on the website. So with that, I'll take any questions or comments, maybe. Yeah, Scott.
So you said plant early. What's early? What do you think is about right?
For us, May 15th would be early. I don't know if it's necessarily doable. May 20th is a good.
Yeah, that would have been my thought. The last 10 days of May probably is a pretty good window.
Yeah.
Okay. What were you shooting for? More like a 55-degree soil temp? Is that what you were shooting for?
Generally speaking, yes. More for, is there soil moisture to get it up, and then soil temp secondary. So we planted the brush site last year. We planted May 7th, I think. It was very early. It did just fine. So.
Did you do any testing at all for like a 30-inch row versus planting with an error drill?
Not last year. I actually did that for my master's research a while back, 10 years ago, and at the time I didn't think it was good data, but I know, well, us, for example, we have drilled our Milo and had good luck with it. So I think it depends on the type of drill you have, and just, you want to have good seed to soil contact if you drill it, but it's doable.
And up your seed area a little bit to make up for the fact that a drill's not that great.
Yeah.
Plugging rows helps too, like 20s or 15 or 30s. Yeah.
You're right.
Anybody else? Okay. I'm off the hook. Did everybody sign in?
No.
Oh, I didn't get it. So what do you think on seed rates then?
For dryland, we do 45,000. I know down by Eads, they'll do around 30.
Yeah.
And then for the irrigated, we did 85. So, but we dropped 40. I think it's like 43.6 is the exact number that we drop, and you might get 33,000 stand, and then you'll get some tillers. So, okay, I think I will get Britt's presentation loaded.
In your studies, do you do anything on how well it stands up?
Yes, if there's any lodging, we'll take lodging percentage ratings on it. So if we don't see it, the data's not there, but Sheridan Lake, I think 2 years ago, we got really good lodging data. And so it's on the results too. Yes, yep. Well, let's just finish up this.
We off of YouTube now?
No.
Gotta be quiet.
Brent, can I have your?
You're good.
Yeah.
Pretty good pizza. Yeah, pizza.
Yeah,
Yeah. Like,
I'm actually working with these guys in front of me. It's real. Have a planner.
success.
I'm asking Jans if I don't get to sign in.
You know, 107 years or whatever, and plus. And then
Okay, well, it's good to be with you guys today. I am Brent Bean. I'm the agronomist with the Sorghum Checkoff. So if you grow sorghum, I work for you. Part of your, what goes into the checkoff from your fields pays my salary. So anytime I can answer some questions or help you guys, well, feel free to, give me a call and we can discuss it. I've been working with sorghum for a long time, so we've got quite a bit of experience with it. So we can talk. We're going to mostly talk about weed control here today, but if you got other questions, we can sure talk about those too. Somebody on Twitter had asked about forage sorghum, and we're going to cover that at this meeting. No, we're really not, because that'd be another hour presentation, so I don't think you guys want that. But is it working?
It's not showing right side. I'll get it.
Okay. But if any of you have some questions about forage sorghum, be glad to stay afterwards to answer some questions. I actually got a couple of three actual booklets on silage sorghum, is what it mostly covers in this booklet, that has a lot of information on agronomy and how to grow silage sorghum. But again, be glad to answer questions about it later on. Okay, so mostly I'm going to talk about these new herbicide technologies. I think that's what most of you probably came to hear about today. But I did want to talk about some other herbicides, just to kind of set the stage that we do use in sorghum, and just make some general comments about this. Again, I could make an hour presentation on weed control, not even talking about the herbicide technologies. But the pre-emergence herbicides that we have available, this is pretty much the list. Roughly 6, 7 active ingredients, depending on how you want to count them. Atrazine, of course, has been the mainstay for a long time. Hopefully, we'll continue to have atrazine. It certainly doesn't work as good as it did 20 years ago, but usually, if you leave it out of the tank, you'll figure out pretty quickly it's still doing a lot of good. It's certainly possible in the next couple of years there's going to be some restrictions put on atrazine use. We'll see what that ends up being. It has to do with watersheds and runoff and other things. But it's quite possible that there's going to be actually listed on the label, not only atrazine, but some of these other pesticides, some things you're going to have to do in order to use them, some mitigation strategies, whether that's going no-till or using terraces, or you've got grass planted in your waterways. I mean, all kinds of things are kind of coming. So we'll see how that all plays out, but nothing's going to happen for probably a good couple of years. But NSP a few months ago was really pushing for comments to go into EPA on that, and it's important that anytime you see a call for comments that you do that. The group 15 herbicides, metolachlor, acetochlor, dimethenamide, those are pretty good grass herbicides as well as broadleaf herbicides. All three of them to me are fairly similar, and I've done studies with these for 30 years. And when I look at it, I don't see a big difference in them. If it were me, I'd be looking at the cost. There's some little differences here and there about them. Something sometimes I cover when I talk about metolachlor. There is a difference in S-metolachlor and metolachlor. Okay. Under ideal conditions, you won't see a difference. When you don't have ideal conditions, which to be honest out here, you guys don't have ideal conditions a lot of times, that S-metolachlor is going to make a difference. And I've seen a big difference in some years compared to metolachlor. And I used to think, well, you can get metolachlor cheaper, so I'm just going to up the rate. You can't up the rate enough really to offset that sometimes. So I'm a pretty strong believer in S-metolachlor over metolachlor. So just kind of keep that in mind.
So what's the difference between S and regular?
The regular has a mix of what they call isomers. So it's a slightly different molecule of that metolachlor. The one that they consider the S-metolachlor is more active. And so when you're planting dual magnum, for instance, and some others, that's S-metolachlor. And so it has that isomer, that particular molecule that's more active. That's the difference. Acetochlor, kind of, again, a close cousin to metolachlor, potentially can get a little more sorghum injury with acetochlor. Warrant is encapsulated, so when they do that to kind of extend the control, which can be an issue with these Group 15s. The little bit of the issue I have with that encapsulation, it's a good idea and it works good. If you have a very heavy population of weeds, you need to have that full dose basically available right away. And you don't when it's encapsulated because that's a slow release. But that being said, I do like acetochlor. Dimethylamide outlook, that's the same active ingredient that's in the combination of verdict there. Outlook has a little higher water solubility. It's a little easier to activate. So in really dry conditions, you'll see that outlook do a little bit better than the other two. And I've seen that. I saw it this last year. Really kind of stood out a little bit to me. This were treatments we had with verdict particularly just really did well last year. And so that's kind of the difference in those. But again, I'd look at the cost on those a lot of times if it were me. Mesotrione, been around now for quite a while. You may use it as Callisto in corn, a lot of generics out there now, which has made the price much cheaper of mesotrione. So you're seeing people mixing that a lot more than what they used to. Drawback on mesotrione, you cannot use that on sandy soil. So it has to be a heavier textured soil or you will get injury, significant injury. Under certain conditions, you can get injury. I had a field a couple of years ago, I was working with a guy in Oklahoma. He was mixing mesotrione with some other products and put it out. I really think he put everything out right. Right after you got it put out, it started raining. It rained for the next month. I mean, just every other day. Cool conditions. That sorghum came up. It looked yellow. And he sent me a picture. I said, it's going to grow out of it. It'll be fine. Kept raining, kept me in cool conditions. A week later, that was dead. So it can happen. Pretty unusual for it to happen, but it can happen. But that has to be just kind of the right conditions. But it's a very good product. We're seeing more of, you used to see it sold a lot as Lumax or Lexar, which is a combination of three-way mix of metolachlor, atrazine, and mesotrione. You're seeing a lot of two-way mixes now with maybe acetochlor or metolachlor and the mesotrione without the atrazine. And that treatment worked really well this last year on Palmer Amaranth. Did a nice job in some trials that we had out. Then the saprophyncil or sharpen, that is one of the active ingredients. It's in verdict. Maybe you're familiar more with sharpen as a pre-plant treatment, but verdict. And then usually when verdict it goes out, people usually add another 10 ounces or so of outlook to bump that dimethylamide up some. Is generally the way that's put out on that. Any questions just kind of in general on pre-emergence herbicides? Yeah.
Where you out of flumioxazin? Flumioxazin, Valor.
Valor, okay. Yeah, Valor is, I like Valor. It's a good product. you can get some injury with it sometimes, especially on sandier soils. That label says 28 days prior to planting, 28 or 30. You can certainly do it, I think, 2 weeks and very seldom see injury. We've done several trials with that, and occasionally we'll see some injury, but it's usually not much. And the lower rate certainly is going to lessen the chances of injury. But I like that treatment. It's a good
Western
treatment.
Kansas, the staple right now is put that on now.
Now, okay.
Yes, atrazine, benzoin.
Yeah, certainly if you put it out now, you're not going to have any issue, obviously.
Right.
But I see a lot of guys do put it out just like a couple of weeks ahead of planting, and that gets a little iffy, but it generally works. It's been my experience, but there's the potential. And if you're going to do that right before planting, I would use a little bit lower rate on that. But yeah, getting to be a pretty popular pre-plant treatment. Yeah. Any other questions?
What's the max rate of mesotrione that you worry about injury?
If I remember those rates now, that I think that maximum rate is 6 ounces, if I recall right. That's pretty hot. If I was going to go that 6 ounce rate on a clay loam soil, not on a sandy soil, I would want to go 7 days prior to planting. And you wouldn't think 7 days makes much difference, but it does. In Texas, it was not labeled for a long time, but Kansas had it labeled for use probably 4 or 5 years before Texas did. And they just didn't see much injury. But in Texas, we would see injury with that mesotrione if it was applied right at planting. But you move it 7 days ahead of time, then no. But 3 or 4 ounces, I think I feel definitely pretty safe on.
What about after, just post-plant, or pre-emergence and post-plant?
You mean, yeah, so right after you plant? Is that what you're saying? Yeah, that's where I'd want to lower that rate. Again, under the right conditions, I don't think you're going to have a problem with that. But yeah, that 3 or 4 ounce rate is kind of where I would probably go on that.
Thanks.
Yeah, before it comes up. Once it comes up, yeah, it's gonna hurt the sorghum if you put it on post. I messed with that for several years trying to get that to work post-emergence, and I could get it to work at, I think, a 2 ounce rate, certainly a 1.5 ounce rate, but then my weed control wasn't there. So, and then it made a difference if I had AMS in the tank and things like that. So it clearly made a difference. There is some work trying to develop some hybrids that are tolerant to that class of herbicide, so we could use it post, but not there yet. Okay, post-emergence. Really, again, not a whole lot of active ingredients. Atrazine, really atrazine plus oil on small weeds used to be a really good treatment. It's not as good anymore as it used to be, but it used to be really good. Gosh, when I first started my career with a quart of atrazine and crop oil, I could just smoke Pomeranic, but that isn't the case anymore. But it certainly can be effective in a tank mix and certainly help. 2,4-D, of course, everybody's always worried about injury with 2,4-D, and you can get some injury, but as long as you use the right rate, stay where you should. Put it on sorghum before it gets too tall. It's about 8 to 9 inches. So when you need to have your 2,4-D on or your dicamba, you may get a little bit of injury, but usually it's fine, and we just have to use it sometimes now for the control. Dicamba is a little bit safer than 2,4-D, but not much really. It can also cause the injury. I like to use dicamba in a tank mix with atrazine, or maybe even sometimes with Buctril or bromoxynil, but I'm going to lower that rate of clarity. The full labeled rate of clarity or Banville is 8 ounces. When I'm mixing with a mix with atrazine or Buctril or even Peak prosulfuron, I'm going to lower that rate to probably no more than 4 ounces. And that does boost the control, and that's not enough to cause maybe a little bit of injury, but very little. And that can be a pretty good treatment also. The fluroxapyr, Starane, or Broad Strike, there's a couple other trade names out there now. My opinion is never has particularly been very good on Palmer amaranth. but it is good on kochia and some other weeds. And that fluroxapyr now is included in the Husky. They're calling it Husky FX. Okay, Husky is a mix of bromoxamil, sulfatol, and then that fluroxapyr now. And they're really not charging much for that fluroxapyr to be added to that. So that's probably a pretty good treatment. Husky used to be a really good treatment. I still think it's a good treatment. I could show you lots of slides where we get really good control of palmer amaranth. But it's one of those that either kind of works or it just flat doesn't work because you've got resistance. And so you need to know if you've got resistance to it. If you've got resistance to it and you really have a broadleaf weed problem, palmer amaranth problem that you got to do something with, a tame mix that I really like is Buctril, about 1.5 pints with atrazine at 3/4 to a pound, depending on how much you can stand on what you're doing, and then 2 to 4 ounces of that clarity. That can be a pretty good rescue type treatment if you got to do something. Peak's not used out here because it's just it stays in the soil too long. And if you were going to use it, I'd use it at a 1/2 ounce rate rather than the 1 ounce rate, and then mix it with either clarity or atrazine. Other products, we were talking earlier about Yukon. Yukon is a mix of permit and clarity. They're practically giving the clarity away in that mix, so it's not a bad treatment. Permit will pick up maybe some other broadleaf weeds that you have out there. It's not very good on pigweed, in my opinion, but it does pick up some other weeds. So you got the clarity in there for the palmer. Any questions?
The Yukon does pretty good on puncture vine.
On puncture vine?
With the permit.
Okay. Yeah, so if you're mixing, just the Yukon or Yukon plus permit?
No, Yukon has the permit.
Yeah, it has the permit in it.
The permit is kind of a residual on the puncture vine.
Okay. Anything else? We're always trying new things, post-emergence and pre-emergence. We put out a bunch of cotton herbicides last year, pre-emergence, just to see how they would work. We're talking about doing some more of those kinds of things this next year, because if we end up losing atrazine one of these days, we want to kind of be prepared for that. What are we going to do? And so we look at a lot of different products. Okay, herbicide technologies. Over the last 3 years, we've got these 3 new, what we call technologies that we can use in sorghum, primarily or almost exclusively for grass control, post-emergence. That's what we were going for. We've been working on this for a long time to develop this with the seed companies, and all of a sudden in 3 years, we've got 3 products. So when it rains, it pours, I guess. But anyway, the products that we've got, iGrowth, Enzen, and Double Team. iGrowth is from Advanta. The product used in that is Imaflex. You probably hadn't heard of Imaflex. Imaflex, if you possibly have used that in wheat as Beyond, some of you may use Beyond herbicide. That's that active ingredient, Imaflex. It's an ALS herbicide, but it's in the imidazolone subclass, so a little different from the sulfonylureas like your Ally, for example, is an SU. You can use that product both pre and post, and I'll show you data on that in just a minute. Has some broadleaf activity. I call it moderate. You really don't want to count on it to control your broadleaves by itself. You've really got to get it mixed with something else, in my opinion, for broadleaf weed control. But it'll help. But it's not going to solve your broadleaf weed problem. Again, I could show you some data on broadleaves, but I didn't bring that with me today. Crop rotation, I'm going to talk about that later with wheat and some other things. Seed per bag. They're selling the iGrowth seed at 600,000 seed per bag. Double Team is doing the same thing, 600,000 seed per bag. That is the coming thing. You're going to see that more with other companies doing that. That's just what's coming. And it's time. It really is. I mean, you buy a bag of corn, you know how much seed you got. You buy a bag of sorghum, you may have 12,000 a pound or 19,000 a pound. So huge difference. So Just kind of be aware of that. So if you buy one of these varieties and you pick it up and you think all of a sudden you've gotten a lot stronger because this is light, it's probably because it weighs 40 pounds instead of 50. Okay. So kind of keep that in mind. The Enzyme, Pioneer Corteva, Zest is a herbicide, which is a sulfonylurea. It's the old nicosulfuron. Some of you older guys that maybe used accent herbicide, same active ingredient that was used in corn back 25 years ago, and did a nice job when it first came out, but it was pretty much completely replaced with glyphosate. Maybe a little broadleaf activity, but very little. Really isn't any crop rotation restrictions. It still is being sold as a 50-pound bag, but that may change fairly soon too. Then the double team, S&W seed. That was the chemical partner. First Act is the product. It's an ACCase or a FOP to be more specific. Go into more detail on this in a minute. No broadleaf activity whatsoever, strictly post-emergence. Okay. Crop rotations, really none, and again, the 600,000 seed. So going into a little more detail on these, the eye growth, they do have seed available of, I think, most of these hybrids you would potentially use, these eye growth technologies, but I would call, and if you want one of them, get to talk to them now. All these technologies, the companies are charging more, and they should, because it cost them quite a bit to develop this technology. So roughly $260 a bag is the manufacturer's suggested retail price. The Inflex is not necessarily cheap either. That 6-ounce rate that you use post is going to cost you about $13.50. And this is not going to be a standalone herbicide. You're going to mix it with something else. Okay, so this is not going to replace anything that you're doing. As I mentioned earlier, it has both grass and broadleaf activity, but really, if you're going to use this technology, it's going to be for grass control. That's what you're shooting for. Talked about it being an ALS herbicide, but in the ME subclass. Okay. But it's still an ALS, and so there could, if you've got some resistance to SUs that you know of, like Amber doesn't work, or Glean, or Finesse, if those products aren't working in your wheat or in a fallow situation, it's possible that this ME is not going to work either. It might. Again, it's a different subclass. There may or may not be that resistance, but just kind of be aware of that. Does have longer residual, which can be a good thing, and that's why you can use it pre, because it has that soil residual. It can work good pre under the right conditions. There's also no significant growth stages or tank mix restrictions, really, which is a plus. The double team, and we've got guys from S&W here today that can go into more detail about some of this. I have on this particular slide, they've got a good supply, but that may or may not be the case with every variety. So may let those guys talk about this here in a little bit, but there's going to be some varieties that are going to be very limited. It's a variety or two. So you do need to get that seed booked now if you're wanting that. See what the cost of the seed is, $306 a bag. Adama, the herbicide, is really not particularly expensive. That 10-ounce rate, and the rate varies from 8 to 12 ounces, is roughly $1 an ounce is what that is costing on the herbicide part of it. Coazlifop is the active ingredient, been around for a long time. In a broadleaf crop, you may have used it as a Sure, so some of you are probably familiar with that. But First Act is the only product that's labeled for this technology. And it's a good product. It's Coazlifop. The most common rate is going to be that 10-ounce rate, I think, for the most part. I think if you get it on some smaller grass, you could probably shave that back to that 8-ounce rate, but I would kind of stick to the 10. There are some restrictions on how it's used because they have seen some crop injury under the right conditions. So they want you to wait until that sorghum is at least 11 inches tall. Okay, the potential drawback to that is, well, what if my grass is 10 inches tall? It's going to be hard to control. Okay, so that is one potential issue there. Also, there can be some issues with mixing broadleaf herbicide. I'll show you a little bit of data on that, but like 2,4-D and dicamba, you can have an antagonistic effect that really hampers the control. Again, kind of under the right conditions. Really where they've seen this injury, and Scott and others may want to comment on this, but where they've seen that injury really is in those environments that are wetter and more humid than we have here. Doesn't mean you won't see that injury here. As soon as I say you won't, you will. But
Yeah, I think if you're familiar, a lot of you, how many have grown, what's the ACC's tolerant wheat? Coaxium. And you've got the same thing, you know, you gotta wait for a certain temperature, or we'll talk about cloudy days. Where we've seen the most injury is when you spray and then it's cloudy for a couple of days. Now, that's, most of the injury we have seen was in places like South Texas where it's cloudy, we do it all the time. In high plains, we see less of it than we have, because we don't get that many cloudy days. And we think humidity has some impact on it as well.
so I think kind of the bottom line is I think it's a lot safer in you guys' environment. But it doesn't mean you couldn't see some injury if you push that and put it on a little bit early. And then I'll show you some information on mixing this with other herbicides. The Enzyme, there is seed available of this year. They've got roughly 50,000 acres worth of seed for the high plains. The issue with this variety for you guys, though, is it's a longer maturity. It's 70 days to flowering. So going off Sally's information, you're looking at probably 85 days to flowering. So, you know, that is just probably not going to have a good fit. So it'll probably be a couple more years before they come out with a shorter maturing hybrid that you could use the Pioneer or the Enzyme technology. Again, Zest, nickel sulfuron is the herbicide that's used. See what the cost of that is. Again, $360 a bag. But that is a 50-pound bag. So that is more seed right now in that Enzyme. Again, that's probably going to change, but that's my understanding. That is a 50-pound bag. Very good activity on grass species, but again, very limited on broadleaf. You might see a little under the right conditions, but you're not going to see much. Then just be aware of that sulfonylurea resistance. If you've got grass that's already resistant. So what's this technology going to cost? If somebody else could put a chart like this together and come out with some little bit different numbers than I have, but what I did, I looked at the herbicide cost, looked at the seed cost, put these seeding rates up here, looked at the manufacturer's suggested retail price, knocked off 10%. That may or may not be true. They may jack it up 10%. I don't know. But this is the way I did it, 10%. Subtracted the cost of what a traditional sorghum would cost, and that's how I came up with these numbers. So I think they're relatively close, but they're going to vary depending on your situation. And really the technologies, bottom line, are fairly similar in cost, okay? Depending on what your seeding rate is and what your herbicide rate is. I'm also using on the Imiflex, I'm using the 6-ounce rate post-emergence because that, in my opinion, is probably the better way to put it out. If you're using the pre-rate, that's 9 ounces, so of course that's going to increase the cost. But for whatever reason, there may be some advantages to doing that in some cases. Use it in the weed control system, yes.
There was a question online. Can you talk about adjuvant, crop oil, or non-ionic surfactant use rates with herbicide-tolerant sorghum varieties and their effect on plant growth?
Okay, so surfactants and adjuvants, yeah, that's kind of a whole other talk too. Of course, all of these are going to require an adjuvant of some sort, and I'm just going to, cop out here and tell you, look at the label and do what the label tells you to use. I mean, in general, I think most of these are using the non-ionic surfactant, but I think on the label you can use the crop oil.
Yeah, we want crop oil.
And crop oil typically is going to give you better control, okay, usually than the NIS. But there's also potential for a little more injury, in my opinion, with crop oil. AMS, under dry conditions, I think AMS it really helps. We're adding some 32O or whatever to that. I think does help that under dry conditions. So of course that's what we usually have out here. Those dry dry type conditions. So not sure that's a very good answer because there's lots of adjuvants out there and very few people test those. So there's always somebody going to sell you something that's a little better. But just a good nylon surfactant is what I would recommend, or the crop oil that you've probably used in the past. Okay. So we're going to use these technologies in a weed control system, which means we're going to start clean, just like we would with any other technology. You really need to use a pre-emergence herbicide. Even if you're using the Imiflex, you're going to want to combine that with a group 15 herbicide. That's acetochlor, metolachlor, and dimethynamine. Post-emergence, if you need to use something post-emergence, and that's what we want to do, and we want to do it in the right way, we want to spray it when the grass is the right size and those kind of things, you're going to need some broadleaf weed control help. So it's another reason you're going to use a group 15 and probably use some other herbicides, use atrazine and some other things. This is not going to replace anything you're already doing, in all likelihood. It's going to be an add-on. But if you've got a serious grass problem, how much sorghum are you making? I think that's the question. So these technologies, where they have their fit, is where you've got serious grass. That's where you're going to want to use these technologies. So this is just some slides that I like to use, is just because it really illustrates it very well. This is in Nebraska. This is actually with the Enzen technology, but you could use any of the technologies and do the same thing. This is what the untreated look like. Lots of grass, lots of broadleaves. Cinch ATZ, that's a metolachlor atrazine mix, okay? Certainly did a lot of good, but you'd look at this and say, well, that's really not acceptable. But compared to that untreated, it looks pretty good, right? Then you come back with Zest, in this case, with 3/4 pound of atrazine, and cleans it up. So again, use these in a system is what you want to do. So talk a little bit some data, and we do have some Colorado data that I'll talk about here. This is Fort Collins. This is looking at barnyard grass, and that's in the blue and green bar there, okay? Excuse me, I'm sorry, blue and red is barnyard grass. And then the crabgrass is, I'm going to get this straight in a minute. Green foxtail is the orange and green bars. And really you're seeing pretty similar control of both those grass species. Actually, the barnyard grass seemed to be a little easier to control than the foxtail, which kind of surprised me a little bit because I think of green foxtails as being a relatively easy grass to control. But in this study, the barnyard grass was a little better. You can kind of see how they did. All three technologies really worked pretty good on these grasses. I don't think anyone's going to complain about that. That antagonism that I talked about with First Act, this slide demonstrates that. So this was First Act applied with 2,4-D. Look at that 33 days after application compared to First Act by itself, really dropped off. Okay, we don't always see that, but we see it enough that it's a problem, and I would not do it. Clarity, in this particular case, we did not see a reduction in control, but I can show you data where we do see reduction in control. But if you get into a situation and you just got to mix it, Clarity is going to be a better choice than 2,4-D because I do see a lot less injury with Clarity. If I do 10 trials, probably half of those trials I don't see any Clarity injury. The other half I do. Okay, so but that is real. And I've seen some data out of Kansas where it's even more pronounced than this on that antagonism that you can get into. So what do you want to do about your broadleaf weeds post-emergence? What you want to do is control those broadleaf weeds with an earlier treatment. Get those pigweed, get those when they're small, just coming up. Sorghum's going to be smaller. Treat your broadleaves first. Wait a few days. I think the label says 7 days, but wait a few days, then come back and put your First Act out for your grass control. Okay, this is that very dramatic difference here when the 2,4-D was added to the First Act. and a lot of injury with clarity, okay? In this particular case on giant foxtail in Nebraska. Sandburn, I know that's the grass a lot of you guys have an issue with here. Really, I've been very impressed with all three of these technologies on sandburn. They all seem to do a good job, which is a bit surprising, but they all three I've been very pleased with in trials that I've seen with sandburn. But the Imiflex at the 6 ounce rate, the first act, you can see here we're using crop oil with those. Zest, again, we're following the label. We use the crop oil with AMS with the Zest treatment, but good control. This was right here at Akron. This is looking at Imiflex applied pre. So we've been talking about post. This is pre. In this particular study, this is 7 days after treatment. The 9 ounce rate actually was superior to the dual warrant and dual warrant. But that was the 9 ounce rate. You drop that back to 6 ounces and you see how the control fell off. So it's a 9 ounce rate. A lot of times what I see pre-emergence in studies is I don't see, with other grasses, I don't see much difference. The Imiflex does just about as good as the dual or warrant or the Cetaclor. So to me, I would use those pre and save my Imiflex for a post treatment is the way I would do it. This is green foxtail. This is post. Just looking at another study. This is out of Hayes, Kansas. Again, green foxtail. All three products did really a good job on the green foxtail. This is on 3-leaf grass. I'll show you a little bit on the bigger grass what can happen sometimes. I don't know how well you can see this. This field actually was just solid green foxtail. You can see some here. With that 2,4-D. The control was a lot less with that 2,4-D. You can't pick it up very well, but there's a lot of foxtail there compared to the first act by itself. Volunteer sorghum. How's this going to do if you're going to plant back-to-back sorghum, which I know some guys are wanting to do. This is, again, comparing the three products. You see the blue bar there with the first act being lower. Well, that's because the first act, because that restriction on height was put out a week later. So that blue bar with the first act is really a 7-day action. And first act is slow. It takes a while for that plant to die. And so that's not surprising to see that, but after a little bit more time, and it's looking just as good as the others, if not better. So the three products all do really a good job on volunteer sorghum. Is the bottom line on that. And that's a good thing. Volunteer corn. Okay, so this is looking at Imiflex pre versus post. Pre didn't quite get up to that 60% control pre with the 9 ounce rate. The 6 ounce rate, we got up to about 68% control or so with the Imiflex on volunteer corn. Volunteer corn is going to be a little more difficult to control than I think your volunteer sorghum. Now this is the first act. In this particular case, this is with atrazine and clarity because in this particular study there wasn't an effect on the clarity, so I decided to show that. But you compare that to the Imiflex there, again, 80 to up to 100% control with the first act in this particular study. That's on volunteer corn. Again, that's first act. So did a nice job post-emergence. The Imiflex did a reasonably good job too post-emergence on the volunteer corn. Now, I didn't include Zest in this trial. How come? Because Zest is not going to touch volunteer corn. Remember, that herbicide used to be used in corn all the time as accent. Okay, so it's not going to control volunteer corn. I should also point out the first act is not going to control enlist corn. Okay, a lot of people don't realize this, but they actually use that fluazepop or that ACCA trait as a marker for that enlist trait, and that corn is tolerant to the first act, so that's something just to be aware of. Talk a little bit about varieties here now. This is the list basically of the products that are available. So I've got the Alta varieties listed. There's 5 of them. I've got 5 S&W varieties, and then the Pioneer that's a longer maturity. The ones I have in red are really the ones that I think would fit this area best. Where do I come up to that? Well, I talk to the S&W people. I talk to the iGrowth people, Alta people. I talk to other agronomists. I look at trials that have been done. I talk to growers and kind of come up with this. But those that are in red is really what I think is going to fit this area, probably the best. I've also back in the back have a handout where I list a lot more locations, and I kind of threw it anywhere I could find data. I put it on a spreadsheet. It's what I did. And those that I thought might remotely relate to Eastern Colorado, I put on this sheet. I've got a lot more, but I put it on this sheet. So you can look at this and look at some other locations and see how these kind of did. But certainly you're going to want that shorter maturing hybrid, as Sally was talking about earlier. The 1120 and the 2168. I think of these, the 2168 is the one I would probably lean towards. After talking to people, but either one of those would work out here. Possibly that 93 IG could also potentially work. I would definitely stay away from the 1142. The S&W, and again, Scott or others can talk about these, but the 3830 and the 45A45, I think are probably the best fit for out here. Spore seed availability. Scott, you want to talk about that?
So the 3830 is pretty well spoken for throughout the area. They might be able to, if you bribe Michael, you might be able to find a bag or two. We have plenty of 45A45. Okay, so don't let that. If you hear something sold out, they're probably talking about the 3830. But the 45A45, we've got plenty. So we've got something that'll work. Okay.
So here's some of the data that I was able to collect, and this was on Sally's sheet earlier. This was an Akron in 22. You said 1120 just did not do well. She said she had trouble with it, falling and not hitting out there. Look at the 38 and the 45A45. This is percent of the average of the test, which, that's, some of these aren't going to yield quite like what some of your better other hybrids would do. But again, you got to ask yourself, if I've got serious grass, what is that going to yield? Okay. And I think actually in this case, Sally, correct me if I'm wrong, these were not sprayed with herbicide, right? Or if they were, you didn't get very good grass control?
They were sprayed with just traditional.
Traditional, yeah. So no, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And at Sheridan Lake, we were actually in a field of double team milo that had sandbird, and it was to the line. You could see where they sprayed right up next to the trial.
So kind of keep that in mind. In some of these trials, the grass was there, and so clearly that would have hurt the yield on some of these. So keep that in mind. But what I'm trying to do here, though, is compare the technologies. And that's hard to do because these haven't been out long enough to have a lot of comparisons to make. You see how the Sheridan Lake did. Again, look at that percent average. Or in some cases on this sheet, if it was just a script trial that a grower did, or maybe there wasn't very many entries, I may be comparing it to a traditional variety like Decaf 2905 or whatever the farmer was using for comparison on this sheet to give you an idea of how it compared. But again, that handout's back in the back, and you can take a good look at that on those hybrids. But to some extent, this year it's going to be what is available, because the seed is still. Some hybrids are going to be somewhat available, but you may be pretty selective on what you have to choose, I guess, to do that. We're going to talk about stewardship of this technology. And back in the back, there's this little pamphlet that we put together on stewardship. If we don't take care of this technology, we're going to lose it in just a few years, and you're going to be right back to not being able to control your grass. We've got to take care of this technology. And so you're going to hear me and others talk more about this than you probably want. But we don't want this technology to go the way of many other technologies that are out there that a few years they worked and then they don't. And so there's some things that we need to keep in mind. A lot of the stewardship things that you would do are going to be similar to what we talk about with other herbicides, but there are some things that are specific to sorghum that I'm going to stress here a little bit, particularly as it relates to Johnson grass and shattercane. Okay, those are, you can get cross-pollination of those grasses. Now, the incidence of that occurring is really very low. I mean, it doesn't just readily happen, but it can happen. And it will happen if we're not careful. So that's what we're trying to do is to avoid getting Johnson grass and shattercane resistance. If we avoid that and do those practices to prevent that, we'll also at the same time be going a long way in preventing other grasses from becoming resistant. So again, we're concerned about that gene flow. And so that's what we're working to avoid. We want to use a pre-emergence herbicide that I already mentioned. We want to get a different active ingredient out there, so if we happen to have something, a grass out there that's getting some tolerance, getting some resistance, hopefully we're going to control it with the pre-emergence herbicide while it's still a seedling, okay? So we want to do that. We want to control grass when it's small, if at all possible, because that's when it's going to be easier to control. Bigger grass we may be able to kill, but it's going to be more difficult to control. And that tends to lead to resistance when you don't have a grass that's being completely controlled. So if at all possible, we want to treat small grass. This just demonstrates this. This is at Hays, Kansas, 4-inch versus 12-inch. The blue bar versus the red bar. Huge difference in the control. Now, this was pretty dramatic. I think a lot of times you can get a lot better control of bigger grass than this. You can. I mean, I see it most of the time. But in this particular study, they didn't. The 12-inch just was not controlled very well. So grass size does make a difference. Not surprising. Avoid resistant weeds. Again, if you know you've got a grass species out there that's resistant, then you can't use that technology or it's just going to get worse. Control your Johnson grass and shattercane. Okay, so the key here is you don't want the Johnson grass and shattercane to be flowering at the same time your grain sorghum is flowering. Typically out here, especially out here where you don't have as much tillering, it's going to be about a 7 to 10 day window when that grain sorghum is flowering. So that's the window that you need to have your Johnson grass or shattercane controlled. So you can just mow it, hoe it, whatever you need to do. Just don't let that be heading and flowering at the same time. Okay, that's the key. Of course, Johnson grass has a lot of tillers usually, so you kind of have a big window there. But just control it during that time period that the grain sorghum is flowering. Same thing with the shattercane. Not only in the field, but also around the field. In the Texas Panhandle, where most of the seed production in the U.S. is grown, where they grow those seed production fields and they have male sterile plants out there that they're trying to pollinate with a male to make that hybrid, the distance they want that to be from any other sorghum or Johnson grass or shattercane is 660 feet to try to avoid that pollen flow. Now that's a lot. And if you go 100 feet, it's going to make a big difference. But that just gives you an idea of what kind of pollen flow that you potentially can have. Okay, so the better job you can do in controlling that grass around that field, especially of course downwind, is going to go a long way in helping you control this. Volunteer sorghum. Okay, so if you grow one of these herbicide technology sorghums and you have volunteer come up the next year, a portion of that is going to have that trait in it, and potentially that, again, if you're not careful, that can flow and cause issues. So you want to control that volunteer sorghum the next year. Of course, scout for grass escapes. That's kind of common. If you have grasses or any other weeds that they're not being controlled, and you think, well, maybe they're becoming resistant, you need to call the chemical company, Adama or UPL or Corteva, and talk to them, have them come out and confirm whether or not you've got resistance developing, and then develop a plan to get rid of it. Consider using a harvest aid. Now out here, I'm sure you guys don't use a harvest aid and probably don't need to use a harvest aid. But in some areas, this potentially could help, okay? Because you're controlling maybe some grasses that may be becoming resistant before they set seed is the idea. But again, out here, that's probably not going to be viable. Tarp your grain trucks. Probably don't think about this much, but this is on the side of the road. You don't have to look very far to find on the side of the road. You'll see this. There's Johnson grass, and here's sorghum. Okay, so if you spilled some grain sorghum over on the side of the field, that's a perfect setup to get that resistance developed. So kind of keep that in mind. At least don't overfill your trucks. Okay. Crop rotation. I want to spend a little bit on this because there are some differences in these products and how they're used. If you're using the iGrowth or Enzyme sorghum, to me, treat those very similar because they're both ALSs. Do not rotate with Clearfield wheat, sunflowers, or canola, okay? Because if you had resistance developing in that sorghum and then you plant sunflowers or Clearfield, then that Imiflex is not going to control that. So just be aware, those are the same technologies, okay? Now, in some cases, that could be a plus for you. So say you used the iGrowth sorghum and you wanted to come back in and double crop and plant wheat right behind it. Well, you could do that with Clearfield wheat. You could go back with Clearfield wheat, or you could in another wheat, in all likelihood, depending on some things, but you probably couldn't do it. So it can have some advantages or disadvantages, so just be aware of that. The ACCAs. The first act, Quasvifop, again, that's in the FOP subclass. Other herbicides that are in that class that you might have heard of, this Fusilade, Fluazifop, used to be used quite a bit, not so much anymore. You don't use that. The DIMS, that's a different subclass. You have heard and used probably Select or Clethodim. DIMS are different than the FOPs. And really right now, we just don't see cross resistance, which is great. Okay, so you could potentially, if you used the double team, you could come back in a broadleaf crop and use a DIM and clean that up if you potentially had any resistance in there. So you can potentially do that because at least right now we just don't see that cross resistance. Maybe it's time to quit. But kind of like that iGrowth, if you have coaxium wheat, that is tolerant to the ACCAses. So again, if you planted a coaxium wheat after sorghum, that probably wouldn't be so much of an issue, but what would be an issue is controlling the coaxium wheat volunteer that might come up in that double team sorghum. Okay, that would be where the issue would come into play. Okay. So, some guys at EADS, when we were at that meeting a couple of weeks ago, they really were wanting to use sorghum back to back, just continuous sorghum. We don't generally recommend that, but really with these technologies, you could do that and pretty successfully if you rotate the technologies. Because that's actually a good stewardship plan. Because if you say you use the double team the first year and then come back with the iGrowth the second year, that Imiflex is going to control any resistance that might have been developing from the iGrowth or from the double team. So again, these technologies allow you to be able to do that, to plant continuous sorghum and control the volunteer and those sort of things. So that's a good thing. And that's how, if you're thinking about doing this, you would want to do. You'd want to rotate these technologies. That'd be a very good stewardship plan. Rotation restrictions to different crops. Let's just look at the Imaflex and First Act here. Really with corn, there isn't going to be an issue. Soybeans is not going to be an issue. Wheat, on Imaflex with wheat, got those two asterisks there. Says 3 months. That's if you've had at least 10 inches of rain or irrigation put on that field. If not, then that goes to 15 months. And I saw a field this last year of wheat that was planted after Imaflex was applied. They didn't get that kind of rainfall, and they had a problem, a big problem. So that is real. So keep that in mind. Right now, the Imaflex label reads 18 months. Now, I think over time that will change and they'll get that reduced. But right now, you're not supposed to plant any sorghum for 18 months after Imaflex. So what does that mean? This year, if you're thinking I might go back to sorghum next year, then you don't want to start off with the double team, because double team does allow you to go back to sorghum after 4 months. Okay, so kind of keep that in mind and how you rotate these chemistries. Other information you can find from the companies. Here's their. If you type that into a search engine, that'll information will come up for eye growth or the Enzyme or the double team. So there's lots of information on their websites for this. So that's a lot of information I threw out at you. So be glad to answer any questions you've got on these technologies. You know, we're very glad we've got these technologies because we can control grass. And as I showed you with the slides, we can do it. We can successfully do it. We can control grass. And that should open up some possibilities for us with these technologies. But they're new. We'll have a lot more experience with the hybrids a year from now than we do now. The companies are going to continue to develop these hybrids, and they're going to get better and better. But this is where we're at today. Yeah.
How's it coming on varieties or hybrids for forage production?
Yeah. Well, iGrowth, they do have a silage sorghum, 8484 IG, that's available this year. And I think they've got a significant amount of seed. That's for it's more of a silage sorghum. It's a fairly long maturing hybrid. So again, not quite sure how it would fit out here, depending on what you're doing, what your situation is. But it's like 85, 90 days to flowering in Amarillo. So it's going to be later here. So keep that in mind. S&W, I know we're working on it. Kind of where are y'all at on this technology?
We'll have 2707 GT out next year. If everything goes well in the production field that's been released. There is limited seed around. Doug's got some, Michael's got some, so there should be some to see. It's going to look a lot like if you're familiar with our MK300, so it'll be a two dwarf, about a 7 foot tall silage hybrid that probably harvest maturity, we say in about 100 days. So we expect to have a lot more of that on the market. Jerry's got it in his Mojo lineup.
Okay, yeah.
So you're probably not familiar with Mojo Seed is a small seed company. They're perfect.
Yeah, I didn't know if he had any commercially available this year, but if he does, it's
not
kind
very
of
much. I think he says he's got 150 bags.
Okay, it's kind of considered a premium silage. It actually has very high protein in the grain, a little bit bigger grain on that silage. But that is another one. I'm not aware of any that it's in a more of a hay type sorghum Sudan. Don't even know if much of that's being worked on. But that'll if it's coming, it'll be certainly behind a couple of years.
The pollen flow issue with sorghum Sudan grass is a real issue. I mean, Sudan grasses shed pollen for long periods of time. It's a light pollen that spreads a long, long ways. If we do it, and we've talked about it a lot, it will be in a photoperiod sensitive hybrid that theoretically doesn't have. So we could do it pretty easily. I was actually in Florida a couple of weeks ago. I had a Commodity Classic. I talked to a grower, and he was going to use it for a cover crop setting. And he's like, well, we'll never let it get more than about this tall anyway. And I'm like, well, that would be pretty easy for us to do with, now that we have double team on the female side, as a dominant trait, we just gotta put it with the right male. So I haven't had a chance to talk with the breeding team yet about how we would do that and try some.
Now, the photoperiod sensitive stuff would be interesting. If I were making a recommendation to a seed company that we're gonna do something for forage, that's what I would recommend, that photoperiod sensitive. If you're not familiar with what that means, it basically means in this environment here, those things are not gonna ever head out. In this environment. So that would never be an issue. Day length has to get a certain shortness before it triggers to head, and then it's gonna be 3 or 4 weeks after that before it would head out, so.
I don't remember who asked, were you talking about silage type or a hay grazer before it sort of stands out?
Hay type, I just think of hay crops around here and other parts that, there's a grass weed problem because they've raised too much hay in the past and rotation, things like that. Maybe get some sandburs and some other things under control that are.
Like I said, we really haven't focused on it much, but it has come up a couple of times in the last couple of months. And I may try and convince the guys to put a pilot in of some, this will be one of those product developments on the chalkboard deal.
Yeah.
Which actually in Sudan grass has happened a lot, because they're just not, it's not that big a deal, but the genetics are special.
Any other questions about this technology or really anything on sorghum we could talk about? Well, again, I'll be around for a while, so any specific questions you guys want to ask me on anything, I'll be around. So that's all I got, Jim.
All right. Well, thanks, Brent. Sorry, I had to introduce you as Dr. Brent Bean. And, thanks for coming, everybody, and be sure to get some more pizza, cookies, everything. Oh, sign-in sheet. Make sure you sign the sign-in sheet. We're going to do our giveaway. So if anybody hasn't got it, raise your hand and. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We'll pick a number between one and I'll put Brent on there too. Should be 17 people on there roughly.
Yeah.
13, 14.
Between 1 and 14.
Lucky 7.
Joel picked 7.
Lucky 7.
Well, Kenny Jefferson won.
That's a hell of a deal. I didn't even have my name there instead of
Well, we have a few things.
What do you win?
You want them up. How about them?
There we go.
Oh,
Yep. Here, put your name down. Might as well.
Brent, pick a number.
3.
There you go, Fred.
Should have wrote him out.
Cross them out.
Gary Lyon.
Oh, yeah, here
Thank you.
You're long drive, yeah.
All right, yeah.
Guess we have 2 more.
You know.
Well, we don't have to. Might as well.
Who's picking, I'll tell you who it is.
Your turn to pick.
Pick 12.
12.
Mike Love.
Pick.
You want a notebook or a cup?
Okay.
There we go.
Yeah, Mike, pick a number.
15.
Nobody.
7.
Great.
So we already did 7.
5.
Rick Wooten.
Way to help out your chauffeur.
I do have a couple of
Oh.
printouts of this publication if anybody wants it. It's got 2 of them, but we'd like to do it.
Invisible man.
I didn't want to.
Did you say you had that list of field comparisons?
Yeah, it's back here.
But I have to give you bad news.
Okay.
Good night.
No, we don't have, we don't have.
Could have a notebook.
If anybody wants some sports for these guys, I've got 3 of them up here, so you're welcome to that. You got it too.
Boy, I don't know if I would.